Walaikum Assalam. Am I visible? Okay, fine. I welcome you all. I hope you're good, you're fine. Zanib, Walaikum Assalam. Rashid Bashir, Walaikum Assalam. Mehroz Saeed, Walaikum Assalam. Hina Hassan, Walaikum Assalam. Nilufar Altaf, Walaikum Assalam. Lailatul Neha, Walaikum Assalam. Nazir Khatana, Walaikum Assalam. Sumaira Salam, Walaikum Assalam. Mohammed Yamin, Walaikum Assalam. Walaikum Assalam. कैसे हो आप सब लोग? ठीक? वालेकुम अस्सलाम. सीरत मीर, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. मोहम्मद यमीन, good. I'm fine. इनाया खान, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. अफशाना, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. मोहम्मद यमीन, मैं ठीक हूँ. बुरहान मीर, हाँ ठीक, बिल्कुल खैरियत. खान इशफाक, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. शाइस्ता अली, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. इशरत अली, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. चलिए 1 मिनट और वेट कर लेते हैं, उसके बाद अपना टॉपिक जो हम स्टार्ट कर लेते हैं. खान सुहेब, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. रोशनी, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. उज़मा खान, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. इफ़त नज़ीर, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. नसीर खान, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. कौसर समद, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. अरे यासीन, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. साइक राथर, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. मीर कैसर, I'm fine. इमरान भट्ट, वालेकुम अस्सलाम. So let's start now. Yesterday we were discussing the text. Obviously, we are discussing the life of a Dalit, the lives of Dalit communities. So this is an autobiography written by Omprakash Valmiki, wherein he talks about the ordeals that he went through in his childhood, in his school, and the hardships that his community faced. So, in our yesterday's lecture, we discussed how Omprakash Valmiki, when he was in school, he was made to sweep the school for almost 3 days, uninterrupted. And why? When his father saw him sweeping, he was made to sweep just because his father indulged in the profession of sweeping. That made the headmaster of the school, conscious that I should make him to sweep. So after 3 days, when his father passed by the school, he saw him. He saw him sweeping the school, and he could not tolerate it. He threw away the broom from his hand and then confronted the principal. And then the principal, the headmaster of the school, threw this boy away. He told his father कि इनका एडमिशन यहाँ से कैंसिल करवाओ और इनके लिए यहाँ कोई स्पेस नहीं है पढ़ने की. तो उसके बाद क्या मसला होता है कि जो इसके फादर है, ही बिकम सो एंग्री एंड ही चैलेंजेस दिस हेडमास्टर कि मेरा बेटा जो है वो यहीं पे पढ़ेगा. एंड ही गोज टू डिफरेंट हाउसेज ऑफ द त्यागीज ऑब्वियसली आर फ्रॉम द हायर कास्ट. और हर एक घर से इनको यही जवाब मिला कि आपके बेटे को पढ़ के क्या करना है, ये तो एक स्वीपर का बेटा है तो वैसा ही रहेगा. अल्टीमेटली ही गोज टू द हाउस ऑफ द प्रधान, द हेड ऑफ द विलेज. और वहाँ पे इसको एक अश्योरेंस मिलती है कि योर सन ही विल स्टडी इन द सेम स्कूल. द नेक्स्ट डे his son Om Prakash Valmiki, he goes to the school, but while in the school he is fearful of the headmaster. So that is point number 1. Then we discussed uh, the situation of uh, the these Dalits in the harvest season. They were made to work hard in the fields by these tyagis, and they were not paid any wages at all. उनको कोई वेज नहीं दिया जाता था, उनसे हार्ड वर्क करवाया जाता था, और हार्ड वर्क कराने के बाद भी उनको 1 किलो वीट तक नहीं मिलता था. तो ये उनकी सिचुएशन थी. सब कुछ काम करवा के भी उनसे उनको कोई वेज नहीं दिया जाता था, उनको कोई पेमेंट नहीं दिया जाता था. सो टुडे विल कंटिन्यू. So you take out page number 92. Along with these field labors, my mother also cleaned the buttocks and the gears of 8 or 10 tagas. So all the family, they indulged in this profession of sweeping, even his mother. Both Hindus and Muslims. My sister, elder Bhabi, sister-in-law, and my two brothers, Jasbir and Janisar, helped my mother in this work. So his brothers, they also indulged in this work of sweeping. The older brother, Sukhbir, worked for Tagas like a permanent servant. The older brother of Omprakash Valmiki, whose name was Sukhbir, he was a permanent servant in one of the households of Tagas. Every Taga would have 10 to 15 animals in his cowshed. Their dung had to be picked up and brought to the place where uplas or cow dung cakes were made. There would be 5 to 6 baskets of dung to be taken out from every cowshed. During the winter months, it was a very painful job. The cows, buffaloes, and bullocks would be tethered. Tethered means tied. In long hallways, the floor would be covered with the dry leaves of cane or straw. The dung and the urine of animals would spread all over the floor overnight. The matting would be changed after 10 or 15 days, or sometimes a layer of dry leaves would be added on top of the soiled one. To search for dung in the stinking cowsheds was extremely unpleasant. The stink made one feel faint. So all this dirty work was done by these chudas, these Dalits. They were made to do this work. And for a normal human being, staying there, he would literally faint. But for them, because they were very poor, they had to indulge in these sort of works. To compensate us for all this work, we got 5 seers. Seers is a sort of a measuring unit of grain per 2 animals. For doing this work, they would get some sort of a benefit in the form of food. That is about 2.5 kilos of grain. Each Taga household with 10 animals gave 25 seeds of grain a year, about 12 to 15 kilos, a very meager amount. A leftover roti at noon every day, especially made by mixing the flour with husk since it was for the churas. So a special roti was made for them, which was obviously made by mixing the flour with the husk. Sometimes the Joothan, that is again the scraps, would also be put in the basket with rotis for us. So they were made to eat the leftover food. During a wedding, when the guests and the baratis, the bridegroom's party, अब देखिए यहाँ पे पता चलेगा इस पैराग्राफ से कि इसका टाइटल क्यों जूठन रखा गया है इस ऑटोबायोग्राफी का. During a wedding, when the guests and the baratis, the bridegroom's party, were eating their meals, the churas would sit outside with huge baskets. So the people from there, these Dalit communities, they would sit outside a marriage ceremony. After the baratis had eaten, the dirty petals or leaf plates, तो petals होता है जो banana leaf से plates बनते हैं, उन्हीं को कहते हैं, were put in the churas baskets. और जब बराती वहां से निकलते थे, वो जो left over food था वो इनके baskets में डाल देते थे. And they would be very happy, which they took home to save the jute sticking to them. The little pieces of puris, bits of sweetmeats, and a little bit of vegetable were enough to make them happy. Because they were poor, very poor, and they would not have luxury of eating in a marriage ceremony. The Joothan was eaten with a lot of relish. The bridegroom's guests who didn't leave enough scraps on their panels were denounced as gluttons. Gluttons means greedy. और जो guests कुछ भी नहीं रखते थे left over, उनको greedy कहा जाता था. Poor things. They had never enjoyed a wedding feast. So they had licked it all up. During the marriage season, our elders narrated in thrilled voices stories of the baratis that had left several months of जूठन्स। और इनकी कम्युनिटी में जो इनके एल्डर्स है वो ये कहानियां सुनाया करते थे कि कैसे बराती जो है बहुत ज़्यादा खाना लेफ्ट ओवर रखते थे और उनके लिए उस दिन एक पार्टी हो जाती थी. The pieces of puris that were collected from the panels were dried in the sun. And this Joothan and the puris, were collected and they were dried so that they could eat them anytime. A cloth would be spread on a charpai to dry them. Often I would be placed on guard duty because the drying puris attracted crows, hens, and dogs. Even a moment's lapse and the puris would vanish. तो ये जो ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि हैं इनको नज़र रखने के लिए रखा जाता था कि पूरीज कोई खा ना ले, क्योंकि इनको ड्राई करके फिर ये कभी भी ये खाते थे. Hence one would have to sit near the cot. Cot is a simple bed with a stick in hand. So he would use to sit there with a stick in his hand. These dried up puris were very useful during the hard days of the rainy season, and they were consumed during the rainy season. They would be soaked in water and then boiled. The boiled puris were delicious with finely ground red chili pepper and salt. Sometimes they were mixed with gur or molasses. Molasses is a sort of a sweetener to make a gruel. A gruel is a watery porridge which is eaten by poor people. So they would make gruel out of these dried puris in a rainy season, and this dish was eaten with great delight. When I think about all those things today, now this is very important. When this writer of ours, he thinks about those days. When I think about all those things today, thorns begin to prick my heart. I am very upset while I think of those days. What sort of a life was that? कैसी जिंदगी थी वो? After working hard day and night, the price of our sweat was just Joothan. दिन रात मेहनत करके हमारे कम्युनिटी के लोग, और आखिर में इनको क्या मिलता था? लेफ्ट ओवर फूड, एक जूठन मिलता था. And yet no one had any grudges. And no one from his community had any grudges. They would accept it as normal. So वो एक सेंस में इंफीरियोरिटी के साथ वो जीना सीख चुके थे, जो कि वाल्मीकि नहीं चाहते थे. वो चाहते थे कि अपनी कम्युनिटी को अपलिफ्ट करना. ग्रज होता है डीप सीटेड एनिमोसिटी और हेट्रेड और शेम और रिपेंटेंस. कोई भी चीज इनमें नहीं थी. इन्होंने एक्सेप्ट किया था एज नॉर्मल ये सारी चीजें इनकी कम्युनिटी ने. When I was a young boy, I used to go with my parents to help them out. Looking at the food of the Tagas, I would wonder why we never got to eat food like that. कभी कभार जब अपने फादर के साथ, पेरेंट्स के साथ निकलते थे, तो you would see Tagas eating different sort of foods which they would never eat. I would wonder why we never got to eat food like that. When I think of those days today, I feel nauseated. He feels nauseated. This past year, Sukhdev Singh Tyagi's grandson, Surendra, Sukhdev Singh Tyagi, obviously from a upper community, his grandson Surendra visited my house in connection with some interview. He had obtained my address in the village. He stayed the night with us. So here, this autobiography, it's moving back and forth. कभी past में जाती है और कभी present में आती है. तो present में जो है, जो हमारे राइटर है ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि, he is a grown up adult and he is also married. He had obtained my address in the village. He stayed the night with us. My wife fed him a very nice meal. Look at the contrast. On the one hand, they are given a very harsh treatment by Tyagis, but on the other hand, when the grandson of Sukhdev Singh Tyagi visits his house, visits the house of Om Prakash Valmiki, he is given a due respect. He had obtained my address in the village. He stayed the night with us. My wife fed him a very nice meal, and while eating, he said, "Babiji, you make such delicious food. No one in our family can cook so well." His compliment made my wife happy, but I was deeply disturbed for quite some time. The incidents of childhood began knocking at my memory's door again. और जब इसने ये कॉम्प्लीमेंट दिया तो अगेन कुछ टाइम के लिए वो डिस्टर्ब फील कर रहे थे, क्योंकि he is reminded of those childhood memories, and those memories, they haunt him. Surendra had not even been born then. His elder aunt, that is Sukhdev Singh Tyagi's daughter. अब फिर से राइटर जो है वो पास्ट में चला जाता है. Surendra had not even born then. his elder aunt, that is Sukhdev Singh Tyagi's daughter. तो सुखदेव सिंह त्यागी जिसका ग्रैंडसन है सुरेंद्र, अभी वो पैदा नहीं हुआ था और उसकी डॉटर की शादी होने वाली थी. माई मदर यूज टू क्लीन देयर प्लेस. ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि जो है उनकी मदर वहां पे सफाई का काम करती थी. Starting 10 to 12 days before the wedding, my parents had been doing all sort of work at Sukhdev Singh Tyagi's home. A daughter's wedding meant that the prestige of the whole village was at stake. Everything had to be perfect. My father had gone from village to village to collect charpais for the guests. So his parents, they would indulge in all sort of works for the marriage ceremony to happen. The barat was eating. My mother was sitting outside the door with her basket. और जो कि ट्रेडिशन था कि ये जो दलित थे ये बाहर रहते थे वेडिंग सेरेमनी के, ताकि जो भी लेफ्ट ओवर फूड है वो इनको मिल सके. द बारात वॉज ईटिंग. माई मदर वॉज सिटिंग आउटसाइड द डोर विद हर बास्केट. आई एंड माई यंगर सिस्टर माया सेट क्लोज टू माई मदर in the hope that we too would get a share of the sweets and the gourmet. Gourmet is the superior quality food that we could smell cooking inside. When all the people had left after the feast, my mother said to Sukhdev Singh Tyagi as he was crossing the courtyard to come to the front door, Chaudhry ji, all of your guests have eaten and gone. Please put something on the patel. Patel again is a banana leaf plate. For my children, they too have waited for this day. अब जब सारे बाराती निकल गए तो इनकी मदर कह रही है सुखदेव सिंह से, चौधरी जी अब हमें भी कुछ खाने के लिए दीजिए क्योंकि हमने इतनी मेहनत की है, 10-12 दिन से हम इन्हीं प्रिपरेशंस में बिजी है. अब देखिए रिस्पॉन्स क्या है. एक तरफ से हमने कंट्रास्ट देखा कि जब इसका ग्रैंडसन ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि के घर आता है तो उनको अच्छे से फूड दिया जाता है, उनको अच्छे से रिस्पेक्ट दिया जाता है. मगर कंट्रास्ट में देखिए क्या होता है पास्ट में, जब इनकी मदर, इनके पेरेंट्स वहां पे काम करते थे और बारात खत्म होने के बाद इनको फूड तक नहीं दिया जाता है. सुखदेव सिंह पॉइंटेड एट द बास्केट फुल ऑफ डर्टी पेटल्स एंड सेड, यू आर टेकिंग ए बास्केट फुल ऑफ जूठन एंड ऑन टॉप ऑफ दैट यू वांट फूड फॉर योर चिल्ड्रन. एक तो जूठन भी ले रहे हो, ऊपर से on top of that you want food for your children. Don't forget your place. Chudi, pick up your basket and get going. This is the response. कि अपनी औकात मत भूलिए, यहाँ से निकल जाइए और अपना बास्केट भी है साथ ले जाइए. कंट्रास्ट देखिए, एक तरफ से इनके घर में they give them full respect और इनके घर में क्या हो रहा है, इनकी कम्युनिटी के साथ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन हो रहा है, इनको अपनी औकात याद दिलाई जाती है. Those words of Sukhdev Singh Tyagi penetrated my breast like a knife. And this Omprakash Valmiki, quite young थे उन दिनों, and they pierced his heart. वो बातें, they continue to singe me to this day. Singe is burn slightly, and those things they still haunt him. ठीक है, उनको आज भी उसके हार्ट को जलाती है वो चीजें. That night, the mother goddess Durga entered my mother's eyes. It was the first time I saw my mother get so angry, and that was the first time my mother became so angry. She emptied the basket right there. उन्होंने वो जूठन भी वहीं पे फेंक दिया. She said to Sukhdev Singh, pick it up and put it inside your house. Feed it to the Baratis tomorrow morning. She gathered me and my sister and left like an arrow. Sukhdev Singh had pounced on her to hit her, but my mother had confronted him like a lioness without being afraid. That was the first time that Om Prakash Valmiki, he saw a great, courage in his mother. After that day, Ma never went back to his door, and after this incident, she had also stopped taking their Joothan. The same Sukhdev Singh had come to my house. अब again present की बात हो रही है. The same Sukhdev Singh had come to my house one day. My wife had welcomed him with open arms, treating him with the respect due to a village elder. तो जब एक सुखदेव सिंह उसके बाद यहाँ इनके घर आया तो उनको ड्यू रेस्पेक्ट दिया गया. That shows the difference. He had eaten at our house, but after he left, my nephew Sanjaya Khairwal, who is studying for his BSc degree, said to me, Chacha ji, he ate only at your own house. At our place, he did not even drink water. My elder brother Sukhbir was a year-round servant at Suchet Tagas. अब फिर से पास में चली जाती है स्टोरी. जो इनका elder brother सुखदेव था, सुखबीर, sorry, and he was a servant at Suchet Tagis. I was in 5th class then. He would have been around 25 or 26 years of age. He was very dark complexioned, tall, and muscular. One day, a wild boar came inside the village. He had injured a lot of people with his sharp horns. He had entered the cowsheds of the Tagas and injured the oxen, buffaloes, and cows. All the people had climbed on the rooftops to watch this spectacle. No Taga showed the courage to catch the wild boar and throw him out of the village. Sukhbir was returning from Suchet field at that time when he asked the screaming and shouting Tagas on the rooftops as to what had happened. They told him about the boar. Sukhbir drove that boar out of the village with just a stick. That was the courage of his elder brother Sukhbir, who was a servant in Suchit Taga's house. No Taga came out to defend their village, but it was only Sukhbir who just made him go out with just a stick. His confidence and strength impressed the whole village. They had discussed his feat for a long time after that. Feat is a difficult accomplishment, a difficult victory. एंड फिर सारा विलेज जो है वो इसकी तारीफें कर रहा था. One day, then, the tragedy falls on their house. One day, when he returned from work, his body was hot with fever. He was in bed for a week. He's narrating the story of this brother, elder brother Sukhbir. एक दिन वो घर आए and he was having fever. He was in bed for a week. He died without proper medication and ultimately he died. Sukhbir, his elder brother, died. It was as though lightning had struck our family. That was a tragic moment for them. Everything had shattered. Pitaji was totally broken by this tragedy. Ma was so overwhelmed by Sukhbir's death that she would fade at short intervals. Babi had become a widow at a very young age. Our family's condition that had been improving because of my brother now took a turn for the worse. अब इनकी फैमिली की जो कंडीशन है, क्योंकि वो एक फुल टाइम सर्वेंट का काम कर रहे थे, इम्प्रूव हो रही थी धीरे धीरे. तो इससे क्या हुआ, इससे उनकी फैमिली पे भी बहुत बड़ी ट्रेजेडी जो है फॉल हुई. एंड हिज बाबी, she became a widow at a very young age. Our family's condition that had been improving because of my brother now took a turn for the worse. I remember that ever since our brother had started to work, no younger brothers, sister और बाबी went to work in a Tagas. इतनी कंडीशन इम्प्रूव हो गई थी कि कोई इनके घर में except his elder brother कोई भी Tagas के घर में काम नहीं करता था. I never had to sweep anybody's house. After my brother's death, Pitaji and Chacha had joined a road construction crew. They would take on whatever job they were offered. Because the condition of the family, it took a sharp turn. Okay, they became poor again. So his father and Chacha, they had to take up any job they would get. In our community, widow remarriage was an accepted practice. In other Hindu communities, this is not a practice. But in the Dalit community, this is quite normal, this is quite acceptable that widows, they are remarried. Unlike the Hindu tradition, we did not see widow marriages negatively. In the presence of relatives and village elders, my deceased brother Sukhbir's father-in-law betrothed is married his widowed daughter to Jasbir. Jasbir in सुखबीर से सुखबीर का छोटा भाई था, इसका बड़ा भाई था, मगर सबसे एल्डेस्ट जो था वो सुखबीर था. बिकॉज उसकी डेथ हो गई, उसके बाद जो उनकी वाइफ है उनको मैरिज करवाई गई जसबीर से, जो कि घर का दूसरा एक बेटा था, क्योंकि वो नॉर्मल माना जाता था दलित कम्युनिटी में विडो रीमैरिज. Sukhbir's father-in-law betrothed his widowed daughter to Jasbir, the brother who was the next in line to Sukhbir. Everyone in our community accepted this arrangement, and that time my elder brother's son, Narendra, was about 1.5 years old and Babi was pregnant. Devendra was born 6 or 7 months after my brother's death. After Sukhbir's death, the entire burden of my family had fallen on Jasbir's shoulders because he was next in line, so obviously the burden would fall on him. Whatever we could earn in the village was not enough to make ends meet. जो भी हम कमाते थे उससे कोई गुजारा नहीं होता था. The financial condition of the family was precarious. It was very insecure. One day, Jasbir left for Adampur to work for a construction company, Tirath Karam and Company. In those days, an airport was being built in Adampur, Punjab, for the Indian Air Force. After some time, that company had moved to Bagdora, Bengal, to build the airport there. Jasbir's letter came many months after he went to Bagdora. तो जसबीर जो है, क्योंकि अब इनका सारा बर्डन इन्हीं पे है, तो इन्होंने एक कंपनी ज्वाइन की, वहाँ पे काम करना स्टार्ट किया, पहले तो पंजाब में, उसके बाद बंगाल में। तो उसके बाद उनकी लेटर आती है बहुत महीनों के बाद कि मैं बंगाल में हूँ। माँ हैड थ्रोन ए टैंट्रम. टैंट्रम इज अ डिस्प्ले ऑफ अ बैड टेम्पर व्हेन शी हर्ड द नेम ऑफ बंगाल. और जब इनकी माँ ने सुना कि जसबीर जो है वो बंगाल चले गए हैं, तो इनकी माँ ने गुस्सा स्टार्ट किया। अब देखिए, एक कम्युनिटी में हम देखते हैं, एक तो कास्ट प्रिवेलेंट थी, कास्ट सिस्टम वगैरह, और दूसरा मिथ्स में बिलीव करना, ठीक है, वो भी प्रिवेलेंट था। मदर्स आइडिया ऑफ बंगाल वॉज बेस्ड ऑन फोक मिथ्स अबाउट ब्लैक मैजिक एंड कास्टिंग ऑफ स्पेल्स. तो उनका आइडिया बंगाल का था कि वहाँ ब्लैक मैजिक होता है और डिफरेंट स्पेल्स जो है वो वहाँ पे कास्ट होती है, तो इसीलिए वो एंग्री है कि जसबीर वहाँ क्यों गया. Mother's idea of Bengal was based on folk myths about black magic and casting of spells about women who transformed a man into a ram with their magic and tied up in their courtyard. Her Bengal was not the Bengal of Rabindranath Tagore or the revolutionaries. Ever since we got the letter, Mark cried day and night. One son has left the world and the other is in a foreign land. तो उनके लिए बंगाल का जो एक आइडिया था वो ठीक नहीं था. इट वॉज अ नेगेटिव आइडिया. तो ये कहने लगी कि पहला बेटा तो चला गया, अब दूसरा जो है, ही इज इन द फॉरेन लैंड. A pall fell on the house. Pall is a sort of a gloom. Bobby was ill. There was not enough food for us all. Their condition was worsening. We ate whatever we could, scrambled together. No one laughed, no one talked. ना कोई हंसता था, ना कोई बात करता था. ऐसी कंडीशन हो गई थी इनकी फैमिली की. Bobby would sit wordlessly, her head on her knees. All of us seemed to have got locked in our shells. I had passed class 5. Class 5 ने पास किया था ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि ने. I had to get admission in the 6th. The village had Tyagi Inter College. During those days, there would be an inter college after 5th. The village had Tyagi Inter College, Barla, which has now changed its name to Barla Inter College, Barla. There was no question of taking admission given the circumstances the family found itself in, because their condition was getting worse, so it was no point taking admission in that college. How could one think of studies when one didn't even have food? So how would one think of studies when they would not even get food to eat? My heart would become heavy when I saw my schoolmates passing by with books in their hands. और इनको बहुत एक ग्लूम सा महसूस होता था जब इनके ही क्लासमेट्स वहाँ जाते थे पढ़ने के लिए. Janesar was my elder brother. Both of us would leave home early in the morning. We would go around the fields collecting wild grass for our buffalo. तो एक तरफ से इनके क्लासमेट्स जो है पढ़ने के लिए जाते थे, और ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि और उनके ब्रदर कहाँ जाते थे? वो फील्ड्स में जाते थे और ग्रास कलेक्ट करते थे. A few days before his death, Sukhbir had acquired a buffalo in barter. Barter is the exchange of goods. सुखबीर के मरने से पहले उसने एक बफेलो खरीदी थी. तो फ्रॉम सुचेत तागा, वी होप टू मेक सम मनी व्हेन शी काउड. और हम सोचते थे कि व्हेन शी विल गिव अ बर्थ टू अ कैफ, सो विल अर्न सम मनी. Both Janesar and I were constantly busy attending to the buffalo. I also had the responsibility of grazing the pigs in the afternoon. तो अब ओम प्रकाश वाल्मीकि भी जो है डे टू डे हाउस होल्ड वर्क्स जो है उनमें ही लगे रहे. उन्होंने अपनी पढ़ाई भी उस टाइम के लिए बुला दी क्योंकि कंडीशन ही वैसी थी फैमिली की. Pigs were a very important part of our lives, in sickness or in health, in life or in death. In wedding ceremonies, pigs played an important role in all of them. Even our religious ceremonies were incomplete without the pigs. The pigs rooting in the compound were not the symbols of dirt to us, but of prosperity, and so they are today. So pigs, which we consider are not good, okay, they are dirty, but for them and their community, it was quite acceptable, and they were the symbol of prosperity. Yes, the educated among us, who are still very minute in percentage, have separated themselves from these conventions. It is not because of a reformist perspective, but because of their inferiority complex. And now, some of the Dalits who are quite, well read, they have forgot this tradition of keeping pigs in their compounds because they feel inferiority associated with it. But for Valmiki, there shouldn't be any inferiority with one carrying forward one's own traditions. Yes, the educated among us, who are still very minute in percentage, have separated themselves from these conventions. It's not because of a reformist perspective, but because of their inferiority complex that they have done so. The educated ones suffer more from this inferiority complex that is caused by social pressures. And Omprakash Valmiki says that educated ones, they feel this pressure more than the ones who are not educated. So I think we should stop here. Inshallah, we'll continue this tomorrow. And I think just a page left, and then we'll discuss the questions and the multiple choice questions at the end. So tomorrow, hopefully, we'll finish this chapter and then we'll move on to our last chapter. So I hope you have understood. So inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.